Hey, everybody, welcome to Wing Talk. And yes, we're starting on time this time. This is a big show today. We have a really special guest, a guest so special that Luke had to rearrange family plans. They had to celebrate a big family holiday yesterday just so that he could be here today. And we're really excited to have him. But first, I would like to introduce the people that you know and love all the way from Germany. Mark Hoffman. How you doing today, Mark? Oh, fantastic. I am too. As always, we have Falling with Style Mr. D himself, Darren Lines, all the way from the UK. Darren, what's going on?
Hey, yeah, everything's good. First, I do want to say sorry for last week or last month, 3 weeks ago. Sean's brought it up in the chat, so I better say sorry for holding the show back and then not being there. So yeah, sorry. Basically, I had like a job interview, so didn't think it was going to go on as long as it did, but back this month and looking forward to it.
Okay, did you get the job?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Congratulations. Fantastic. We'll have to hear all about that at some point. Oh, and our special, almost secondary guest, Luke, all the way from the same part of the UK. Luke, what's going on?
Yeah, good. Me and Darren just went out flying, got back about half hour ago. Very nearly had the same situation as last week, so yeah, all good.
That was good. Where'd you guys fly?
Just a bit of a random field, really. I actually found out towards the end that it's actually, supposed to be used for model flying, but I didn't realize while we were there. So,
oh, fantastic! It sounds like a good time. Okay, today's special guest, all the way from Quebec, which is in Canada. This is a special guest that we were talking about. Who should we have on Wing Talk? And Darren suggested names like this guy in particular. And then as soon as Darren mentioned it, Luke said, listen, I got family plans, but I will cancel when this guy shows up. So I put a note out to Hugo Chamberland from True RC. And Hugo was nice enough to join us today. So Hugo, how you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. This is really fantastic. Before we get into all the good stuff as far as what's going on with the True RC and what goes, antennas, we're going to focus a lot today on antennas, antenna quality, and how to get more range out of your VTX. Really want to find out more about you. You started off as a hobbyist like the rest of us did, right?
Yeah. I started, back when RC Group was a popular forum. Nowadays, much less, unfortunately. Yeah. And I started, tinkering in RC. I was in RC from little kids, like, 6, 7 years. I was, playing RC like many of us. And then the addiction grew to airplanes, and then, of course, adding the goggle and thing that were pretty crude at the beginning. It was like, I don't know if people remember those Chinese like TV set that were
the big box goggles.
Yeah. Those big box, but beforehand they were like,
I remember
goggles to watch TV. They were not meant for FPV. It was like to watch TV, to look.
I remember the Sony Sennheisers.
Sony Sennheiser. That's a good example. Yeah. So I started with this, and antenna were, of course, and still today a big parts of the experience. And there was not much, variety available. So there was a few online tutorial to make them. So I started making my own, and I started playing around with a reservoir, NEC4, NEC2, this limiter to simulate, various, AM style antenna. And I started designing the antenna using this tool. And pretty much all a self-study on this aspect that I work really hard to develop my own antenna. It was for me it was the hobby. It became the hobby to to just make antenna for FPV. So FPV became somewhat of a second thing, and I was just making antenna in the beginning, just making antenna in my basement, sharing my results online to people, and people wanted them. So I kind of went into an unplanned way into business, and today it became a monster that I have employee and a shop and lots of tooling, and it became an adventure. And today I'm full time doing designing and building antennas. Yeah, for something that I. Pardon?
Was your background in electrical engineering, or is this just something that you started working with? You had an interest in this, and it was a passion for doing this, and it grew from that.
Yeah, I worked as an automation technician before I quit for Torsi. I was an automation technician. I'm not an engineer. No, not even so. So it's just a passion, and from this passion, I've learned all the ropes of antenna engineering.
That's cool. Yeah. And how you got started in that, because we had a guest on about a year ago that was talking about how around that time frame, you were around in 2006 time frame doing this with the NRC groups and starting to it. And it seems like there were a lot of, what he was talking about was at the time there were a lot of people who took the Wii nunchucks apart, and they would use the gyros out of that, and that was really like the first, and this was the first gyros they would put into quadcopters and things like that, right? So this was essentially what it was a bunch of people online trying to figure out this thing called FPV, and then your niche of it was, because you had some expertise in a background, and it was antennas, and you can kind of keep figuring, as an automation technician, you can kind of figure out how to improve it every single little bit more, right?
Yeah, I got a background in electronic, of course, so that helped. And I was, I always been quite good at, using computers. So with the aid of computer simulation, you can build and iterate much faster. So you can try stuff that mostly don't work and figure out all the antenna that doesn't work until you find something that works, so to speak. So I try, thousands of variation, and in order to find, what works better and what make the difference. And so I mostly use, a scientific approach to, trial and error and note what's wrong and then do another experiment.
That's actually interesting. If you simulate this stuff, the design beforehand, does that only simulate basically the behavior of the antenna itself, or also of signals in virtual environments, for example?
Well, it depends on the simulation too. Today I use mostly a finite element simulator, so I can't, build the antenna, design the antenna and the cable and maybe the VTX box or whatever is attached to it that is in the near field. And then I can do simulation and see what are the effect of the cable, what are the effect of the box or whatever that is in the near field. That means under wavelength distance of the antenna. I cannot simulate like a room or a whole quad or plane. That requires a much more powerful tool and costly. So what I do when I get a good result on the simulation and good result once the prototype is built is I sent it to a anechoic chamber testing to validate my model.
How do you do prototyping of such intricate designs? Because I've got a singularity that broke apart, and I can't imagine how you'd make something like that by hand. How do you do it?
Yeah, they are still, most my antenna beside the Singularity, the new one. The older version. There's a new version of the Singularity, but I didn't change, and I didn't call it a V2 or whatever. It just fit into the same case, and most people don't know. So I didn't use the IPE. Let's say a new V2 that is that does pretty much the same as the old one. So I just kept the same name and the same appearance. So yeah, it's a 2 PCB, one that is a network, and one that is a radiator, and the radiator is curved around the network. Yeah, it was kind of hard to make the tooling to solder such a thing. It's so small. Yeah. But
and presumably when you did the prototype, I guess you got a prototype PCB made, and then you did prototype tooling to assemble it, or do you just suffer with the first one assembling it?
The first one, I just it's like you open a Christmas gift. You want to try as soon as possible. So you just try to solder it by hand, and you just to make something that work and validate your question. So I did it by hand, and then I try some crude tooling to hold everything together, and they are then sent to an oven to be baked. And instead of using a soldering iron, you use mostly a.
I can imagine.
Exactly.
I can imagine how hard that must be to make them by hand, especially when we are dealing with these frequencies. If something is just like 1/10 of a millimeter off, it completely can change the tune of the antenna at the end. So I can imagine that it's really hard to do that precise enough to get a valid result at the end.
Yeah, I had to know, I came to the conclusion that designing an antenna is not so hard. What is hard is making it at scale. Yeah, that's really hard to. At the beginning, we were like tossing away 25% of the antenna. It was horrible. Because it was hard to maintain a good tolerance, and the name of the antenna, Singularity, comes from the bandwidth of the antenna, which is really narrow. It covers a really narrow bandwidth of frequency, so there's no place for error. Yeah,
that's right. The question I have is, we have essentially a lot of people. I can explain it this way. We have people who've been in the hobby for a little while now, and what they're starting to find out is that their planes are sticking around longer than they normally do. So they'll build a plane, an INAV plane, and then like a year or two later, they're still flying it. And then we start talking to them about, well, you might want to put better servos in there, better motors. And then when it comes to these antennas, a lot of times what we see is people are like, I can get a servo for $2. I can get a Chinese antenna for $3. And what I'm assuming is what happens is the knockoff antennas, they pretty much, whatever they manufacture goes out the door. So there's no waste whatsoever. You might get a good antenna. Chances are you might be one of those 25% that's a bad antenna. You never know, right?
Yeah. The first time when I released, the Axie, it was with Lumineer. I'm not sure if you remember the Lumineer Axie. It was the first small size FPV antenna, and soon after Foxeer released it was a clone, identical. Even the error I made the antenna was in the copy. It was so. So we went a bit out of an argument with Foxy, of course. So, and they changed the design to a copper stamp design. So they skipped the PCB and use a copper stamp. This basically there's no network in the antenna. So having no network, the antenna radiate somewhat randomly because it interfere. I'll say that it couples with the cable, and you have suddenly two antenna. The outside of the cable becomes an antenna, and the antenna itself, the element. So having two antenna, it's like plugging two antenna into a T, and you get random stuff happening.
What exactly does this network mean? Can you explain that?
It's a balun. A balun comes from imbalance and unbalance. So you have an unbalanced feed because a coax cable, okay, is natively unbalanced because there's one conductor which is not exposed to the outside, and one that is. So inside a coax connector, a coax conductor, there's in reality 3 wires, not 2. There's the inside cable, the interior of the tube, and the exterior of the tube are 2 different connectors from a radio frequency point of view. Because remember that radio wave travel on the skin of a conductor. And a tube got 2 skin, one inside and one outside. And the skin outside is real problematic. It's easy to design an antenna that radiate, but it's really hard to feed it and plug another cable to it without destroying the property that we look for.
That sort of leads on a little bit to a question that I have. Is you mentioned earlier about when you're doing the near field testing. I know you guys can make antennas with a different range of cables, because I saw your post on the new the fixed wing side feeds that you just brought out, and someone commented about length, and you said, yeah, we can do custom lengths up to 30 centimeters.
Yeah.
Does that affect the near field, or is the antenna network protecting that length so that it will work fine with whatever length cable you get?
Yeah, that will work with whatever length cable we can. We fully isolate the cable from the antenna, so the cable can be any length. The only problem is losses. So a side feed, I'm forced to use a fairly small cable, such as a RG178, which is about 2 millimeter diameter, under 1.8. And I can't go like 3 meter without having, quite big losses. So 20 centimeter to 30 centimeter is acceptable. There's a balance to have between the losses and the advantage of placing the antenna away from stuff.
Yeah, these side feeds antennas also raise a question for me. I'm by far no antenna or RF expert at all, but I made some experience in the past. For example, with my R-Sealing system, I used the R9 system in the 868 megahertz band. And what I experienced once was when I bury the T-style antennas with 1/2 completely into the foam of the plane. Basically, the outer parts were just sticking out of the fuselage on each side. I had massive losses. I'm talking about a fail-safe at 1 watt output power on my radio. At 30 kilometers, while with a properly mounted antenna in the wing where both poles of the antenna were poking out freely, I achieved the same range with 10 milliwatts only, so with 1/100th of the power. So I wonder, I know that even foam, even non-conductive materials touching the antenna or very, very close within the wavelength of the antenna can detune them or can change the tune of the antenna. How is that with these side feed antennas? Does bury them into foam change their tune, or are the casings big enough to avoid that?
The casing is big enough to avoid that because the foam won't touch the copper element, so to speak, because there will be a small gap because of this, especially on 5.8. The 1.2 gigahertz model are they have the element are right at the outside, but they have a cap at top and bottom that provides some clearance. So if you want to fit it in foam, you need to cut small, a bit bigger than the antenna is really. But the velocity factor of foam is really close to that of air. So a wave won't slow down much into foam because foam is mostly air. Otherwise, it won't fly. Yeah. So in your particular experience, I would tend to think that something else was happening.
Okay.
You were using a T-style, like an Immortal T antenna.
Yeah.
So if you don't keep the feed at a T, in a T shape for long enough, let's say you bend the feed like this to keep the antenna upright, then the feed will interact with the antenna and mess the radiation pattern.
Oh, that's a good point, because actually when I put it in the fuselage of the clouds, that was right just like 10 millimeters inside the fuselage from the front cover, and then I basically just went into the front cover bay and straight down into the bay to the receiver. So that cable was pretty much parallel to the embedded part of the antenna. And this is a good explanation.
That's mostly the problem, because the cables start to couple with the antenna much more. And what it does to the pattern, instead of having that apple shape that everyone that you all often say, ripples start to appear because you have two antenna that sometimes add together and sometimes cancel each other. So, or instead of an apple, you have multiple ripple that can be like minus 30 dB deep.
So if he happened to be in one of those ripples as well, then it could have been, really bad.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So
because the ripple can be up as high as 30 dB. So your antenna can be from 1 dB, you get full range, and then you're into you tilt the plane just a bit, and you are into a minus 30 dB hole, and you lose signal.
So as a first, I'll ask like the rule of thumb, I guess. What should we be looking for when fitting an antenna as to how far away to take the feed line, at 90 degrees before we can bend it?
And a T antenna, and as the name say, it must stay a T. Okay, and rule of thumb for an antenna, the near field start at a quarter wave.
Okay. So for 900 megahertz, it's like 30 millimeters or so, something like that.
No, that's bigger than this, because a 900 megahertz wave is 33 centimeter. So a quarter. That's like 8 centimeters.
Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking a quarter of the antenna length, but of course that's already a quarter wave antenna.
Yeah.
So,
I think you can
take one element of the antenna, like either the top or bottom, and that's the distance that your feed line must at least before it starts turning. So, and even if the T antenna is shaped as a T, it's still coupled with its feed line because there's no balance. But less so if it stay in the shape of a T.
So keep it in and there's a null on it as well, right?
Yeah.
And there's a positive and a negative.
I mean, I don't think I've ever done that with a T antenna, to be honest. I think I've always had it, curving before a quarter wavelength. But yeah.
I mean, and that it basically also is maybe a more valid explanation why the antennas, especially the T-style antennas out in the wings, bring the best performance, because then automatically you have them flat, the cable flat on the wing while the antenna is vertical, and you have the least amount of losses. That's really interesting stuff. I have never thought about that before. And I actually feel very bad now for all these people who make like 3D printed stems where they put their T-star antenna on and the cable vertical down. So that's basically an absolute nightmare then. And it also explains, I had a very strange experience, and I thought it's the behavior of the R9 receiver, but this explains it actually better. When I first built the AR Pro, like more than 2 years ago now, I rushed it together and I wanted to have it quickly in the air. And I just temporarily installed just one antenna vertical, and I had a second antenna because I had a diversity receiver in it. And I thought, okay, I only need one now for the testing. And the second one was basically crumbled together in the bay, together with all these cables going in a loop. And I think this also caused a lot of interference then to the actual working antenna, because it constantly switched between a very good signal and suddenly loss. Good signal, loss, constantly, like the plane was moving or turning or so. This explains that ripple you explained before.
So to paraphrase what you guys are saying then is essentially what you're saying is that when your T antenna comes up and down, you want the feed into it to be perpendicular.
Yeah, perpendicular for the at least the length of one of the pole of the antennas.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. That's amazing.
I thought that, for example, you sell a barred pole antenna. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was essentially a T antenna, just with a different plastic molding, so that the feed line came down the ground side. But presumably not then. So
it's closer to a ducky antenna. So it got an active element on top and the counterpoise. Okay, the counterpoise goes around the cable, and with the cables it forms a balloon.
Okay.
And that create an area of high impedance for the cable. So the cable becomes an high impedance, and wave cannot ride along the outside of the cable.
I see. Okay. So I think a few times I have made my own barred poles by bending down the side, not actually trying to make a barred pole, but essentially what I've done is bent the feed line down the ground side, thinking that it works for a barred pole or whatever, so it should work fine and it fits better in the wing or whatever, and that really was not a great idea.
The barred pole is a flat version of the bazooka dipole.
Oh, okay.
And you see those little dipole on 5.8. We see on the 5.8 drone and cheap stuff often. Those are actually better than the Chinese CP because they have a balance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now that we speak about losses in general, there's a question from MPS Aris in the chat. How are losses in connectors, UFL, SMA, etc., compared to loss due to cable length? So what has the higher influence here?
They are quasi equivalent. So a connector, let's say an SMA connection is about 1 centimeter long. The losses are about equivalent to 1 centimeter of cable.
Oh, really?
So it's really small. It's really small. If the connector is like super worn out, you start to have losses. But you could stack like 5 adapter and don't see significant loss yet. People hate adapter because they say like 3 dB loss and stuff like that, but that's really not the case. Imagine you have like a 1 watt VTX and with an adapter, and there was a 3 dB loss. You will see that adapter becomes hot because 3 dB is 500 milliwatts, and 500 milliwatts of power being turned into heat is enough to feel it, more than enough to feel it with your hands, and that's not happening. The loss are much lower than that.
So that's actually a good point. If it's 500 milliwatts, you could quite conceivably measure the loss through an adapter using, a thermal camera.
Yeah, Yeah.
At least to see if it's bad. If you've got a high power transmitter, it's not bad because it's not emitting loads of heat.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, if you have, like, as you say, 500 milliwatts you pump into the antenna, if you have a 3 dB loss, that's 250 milliwatts. It's half of the signal. And if you heat up a connector with 0.25 watts, you will see that a 3 dB loss.
Yeah, a quarter watt of power is quite noticeable. Yeah.
Is there also a difference? I mean, okay, SMA, for example, has a very low loss. You say, I got that. But there are, for example, different connector types. Like we have SMA, we have UFL, we have MMCX, and I think, as far as I understood that for each frequency range, a cable or a connector is supposed to transmit or to carry. The distance between the center core, the signal wire basically, and the shielding around is relevant about how big the loss is. And on an SMA, for example, the shielding has a much bigger distance to the core than on an MMCX, for example. How much influence does that have?
Not a lot, because MMCX is still relatively big, but UFL got more loss.
Oh, it has more loss.
More loss. Yeah, it got more loss than all other type. Yeah.
Is that like a measurable amount of loss? Should you go for a VTX with a MMCX rather than a UFL?
No, you will not notice, like, I have a calibrated amount of power and I go through a UFL versus a SMA when I will see a drop of range of 10%. No, that's not enough difference to do that. Yeah. It's on a lab device. I can measure it, but not it's not relevant to
10%, like
flying.
3% reduction in rate, isn't it?
Like 1% or 2%. It's super small still, but yeah, what Mark say is right. The smaller the feed line, the less diameter, the less quality. So a bigger cable will have less loss than a smaller one. For example, I made some remote station for DJI goggle, where the pilots stand somewhere and they have cable attached to the goggle to put the antenna up high into a remote area, either down into a tunnel or up high above the trees. And I use LMR 400 cable, which is bigger than 10 millimeter across. It's huge cable to make a run of 45 feet, for example, to climb the antenna up high.
But so one point you said that a bigger core or bigger signal wire is in general better for less losses. So that means that the diameter of the cable does not dictate what frequency range you can transmit, I guess.
No, it's not the diameter that dictate the frequency range. A bigger diameter will have easier. It will be easier to follow the tolerance you need, because an error of 2% and on a 10 millimeter cable is easier to achieve than an error of 2% into a 1 millimeter cable.
There's more resistance on the smaller cable. And that's
there's more resistance on the smaller cable as well, and there's the quality of the sheeting, so to speak. So if you have a smooth copper wire like mirror, then it will have a better quality at higher frequency.
Oh, okay. So that means if I want to do a antenna extension, like just 2-3 meters, for example, for some ground station or some pole mounted antenna, I could basically use high quality cable TV cables from
cable TV are relatively low quality, and they are 75 ohm.
Okay.
For cable TV, so you need one good cable is RG141 or RG402.
Oh, I heard
which
that
is
before.
this, the semi-flexible cable. It's the default cable we found on antenna. The one it can bend and it stay bent. These cable have pretty low loss at 5.8, and you could do a meter or two run before having significant losses.
What was the other one? RG141.
RG141, which is the same. It's the same dimension. It's the same.
Oh,
it's
just
the same
fully
cable.
flexible
Yeah,
rather
it's
than
just
semi-flex.
no. They are same. Like, there's just two generic name for
I see.
for the same. Yeah.
One of the questions I had was, and this came up about a year ago, which is, you notice sometimes some of the VTX antennas are about this big and some are about this big, right? And there's essentially no real difference as far as signal quality between the two. The length is really right.
No. The only use to a longer cable is to bring the radiating element away from your battery, your whatever is in the way. And I see people with small quad and 10-inch antenna, and there's no gain to this. You just need to be like we did with the T antenna. You need a quarter wave clearance between the radiating element and anything below it.
That also explains why when quad people mount their crossfire antennas, for example, horizontally at the back or on the front, they are more or less parallel to the frame, and the frame is grounded as well as the shield of the antenna. So this basically completely kills their signal, and then they get range issues. So it would be much better to, even on a quad, to have the antenna just vertical, because then you have nothing in parallel to the antenna beside small parts of the frame, where you look at it from a point of view.
Yeah, and you have an antenna that is vertical and then a frame that is mostly horizontal, so that helps also.
We
sell, for example, antenna that are 200 millimeter, but those are for like cine machine, the cine lifter. They have a huge camera that you need to be above it, so you need extra cable length to clear those big objects. That's it.
And we sometimes talk about when you have long range FPV where you mount your VTX antenna on the bottom of the plane, as opposed to it's pointing down instead of on the top. Does that really make any difference whatsoever?
No, it doesn't make any difference. You just have to be aware of where the nodes of the antenna are. They are, for the most part on top and bottom.
Right.
So if you switch to upside down antenna, it radiates the same. If it's right hand polarized, it stay right hand polarized. But and the nodes are in the same axis, so it works exactly the same as a right side up.
Yeah, I think it's more to do with blocking. So if you're above the aircraft, you've got the battery that could potentially block signal. So putting it underneath that, the signal is sort of above you all the time. So I think it's more to do with that than the physicality of the antenna.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense.
And how much does a battery? Because we're starting to talk about when you have quads. Quads are using carbon fiber, and there's a lot of planes now that are being made with carbon fiber as well. For example, F5J gliders, 3-meter gliders. Those are all carbon fiber. Is this becomes a real problem because this is something that kills your signal.
Yeah. You can imagine the antenna is a light. Imagine it's a light, because at the higher the frequency, the more the radio wave act like light, because light is a radio wave. Right. Just super high frequency, like 500 gigahertz and terahertz. It's just super high frequency. So we can pretend the antenna head is a light bulb, and so you put it on your plane and you watch your plane from the point of view of the ground station, and you can somehow imagine the foam is transparent, but the battery goes between me and the antenna and goes a shadow, then you may consider moving your antenna, or maybe be aware of it when you fly.
Okay.
And same thing for carbon fiber. And you can also remember that a wavelength can only see, so to speak, or be blocked by something that is bigger than a tenth of the wavelength. So at 5.8, something that is bigger than 5 millimeter start to interact with the wavelength.
Yeah, so that's something that also just came into my mind when you said it acts like light, but only on a different scale. If you have, like, for example, a very small pinhole or a sharp edge, for example, where you shine light on, and then you would make a photograph of that edge in an extremely high resolution, and you zoom in, you see very, very close to that edge, you see distortions where the light basically gets bent around that corner slightly. But because of the high frequency, this area where the light gets bent around is extremely small. And I guess for RF frequencies at lower frequencies, it's exactly the same, just at a bigger distance and at a bigger scale, because the lower frequencies.
Yes. And for example, let's say a microscope, that you want to see very small thing, then there's things that are so small that they don't interact with the radio wave of light, and you need to go into UV light or maybe X-ray to be able to see those things. Then the same applies to 5.8 gigahertz, where there's stuff that you can see with your eyes because they use a wavelength that is much shorter, but they will be invisible to the 5.8. So like things like, I don't know, smoke, for example, that is, ashes, in particular of ashes, the wave will go through easily. Let's say you on battlefield, they use higher infrared light to see through smoke, because that wavelength is longer and is not affected by smoke, while the visible light is. So there's small thing like a wire or the small object on your airplane or quad will not block the radio wave. You just remember that only bigger object than a tenth of a wave will interact.
So
and
usually
scatter the wave.
So usually like thin wires, thin cables going around. Oh, maybe because they are out of copper, they can slightly interfere if they are parallel, for example. But usually it just passes around them, or zip ties, for example. Yeah.
One question I did have, and this one has made me think. The one thing that does interfere with wavelengths a bit with reception is water. So if you have a kind of a rainy day, your reception is not quite as good as when it's a dry day out. What I was thinking about is on your goggles themselves, your head is full of water, or is it better to have the antennas go above your head, or does it really matter?
Yeah, if let's say the antenna is like this in front of your head, then your head will shadow the antenna. So behind your head, forget it to pass this a signal there. So having it stick in, like I said, a quarter wave, like 2 or 3 centimeters at least above your head, then you get full coverage behind you as well.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that even moisture in the air. I think water is basically a big enemy for our signals.
Not like I said, a water droplet is smaller than 5 millimeter.
Yeah, water droplet. Yes, but I think like air moisture, the air humidity, for example.
Humidity not much, because humidity is just water molecule, and water molecule are so small.
Okay.
For example, you see the sky is blue. because the only frequency that is high enough to interact and be scattered by those water molecules is blue light.
Mm.
The issue with humidity and rain is water collecting on the antenna.
Interesting. I just thought that humidity also can influence that, because I had once the experience that at the exact same flying spot, same flying direction on 2 different days. At one day where it was already dry and sunny a few days in a row, I had very great range. And with the same planes, same equipment, just after a rainy night before, I just reached like 60%, 70% of the range suddenly. And I thought that's the humidity in the air that influences that.
There might be another reason. Humidity will have an effect, but it's very small. It's a few percent.
Okay.
But,
so it's also just basically one case study, because I had two identical flights, one on a moist day and one on a dry day. So cannot validate if that was the case, but that was just an assumption. Yeah. Okay. Maybe also other things like reflections from the ground. If the ground moisture is different, can that have influence?
Yes.
Okay.
There might be, more reflection on a dry day, and you go far by riding those reflections. So a bit like, have you seen the 100-kilometer flight from Varty, from Wesley Varty?
Yeah.
So he used a parabola dish to feed his video. Okay. And he made the fade of the dish within a right-hand polarized antenna. And he had a right-hand polarized antenna on the plane, so he was using reverse polarization. So he had, bad video, and then he started to ride the reflection and got, piece of good video at 100-kilometer distance.
Okay.
Because he could, ride some reflection that are random, but those reflections happen, and they may happen in less in a more humid day. They happen less, or vice versa. So it's a random, parameter.
Interesting.
You mentioned that on the antenna itself, if you get water on the antenna, that can affect the range of the antenna.
Yeah, that's because you get stuff into the near field.
That's what we talked about before. If you have material within that quarter wavelength distance of the antenna, it will detune it and dampen the signal.
Yeah.
So could you help that by putting, if you're going to be flying in the rain, you could put a foam box or something around the antenna?
Yeah, you could have like a foam ball around the antenna, and that foam ball is covered with something like Rain XR, that stuff that doesn't collect water. So the droplet just, fly off and they stay, and the most important, the droplets stay into a droplet size instead of wetting a whole sphere and becoming one splash of water that is 10 centimeters across or something. They stay as small droplet, thus invisible to the wavelength.
Okay.
Interesting. All right. So what do we, when we're telling people to mount their antennas, is there one spot in particular? Is it better to put it in the front of a plane? Is it better to put it on the wing of a plane? You're saying the side patch, Mark is claiming that is better because it forces you to, the side feed antennas are better because it forces you to kind of use right wiring direction as far as that's concerned. Is there one way that you can get maximum range off of mounting an antenna? Or what tips would you have for that?
Well, the one with the T antenna, then you must mount it. Like I said, you can always imagine the antenna is a light, and if, let's say, you put the light far away from your battery, then the shadow of the battery will be smaller. It's physics, you just draw a triangle. So the farther away of your battery as possible. So wingtip is a good place. Vertical stabilizer, maybe. And I like the underbelly of a plane because they mostly fly above you. Side feed. Pardon me?
What I've been noticing is like when you can log telemetry, when people fly away, typically when they do the turns, that's when you see signal drop for a turn. When they turn around, and then it comes back, which leads me to believe that there's somehow maximum if you would like best range, it has to be flying away from you. When I guess you're turning the null towards the transmitter or VTX or receiver goggles, wherever you were talking about, if it's a transmitter or goggles.
Yeah, when you bank, the null will go towards you. The frequency. Hugo could probably explain it a lot better. But the apple shape you were talking about, sort of the extremes, they're going to have less power than the main body of the donut or whatever you want to call
So
it.
you're just saying is that it's like almost like a donut then, and then when the donut turns sideways, what happens is it's going this way and that way as opposed to I see what you're saying.
There's two factor. There's the donut shape. So as you tilt more than 45 degrees, you just start to get into the null. So you have to bank the plane 45 degrees or more to start to feel the null. And if you have a telemetry antenna that is linear polarized, then when a linear polarized antenna communicate with another one, they must be parallel. As you bring 45 degrees between them, half power is lost. And if there's 90 degrees between them, then mostly all the power is lost. So that's another reason. So that's the cross polarization loss, they call.
Yeah. I have a question in the chat right now from Krytone FPV. After the enlightenment of how straight a T-style coax needs to be, does this apply to VTX antenna and with the UFL, SMA, MMCX cables as well?
For the T-style antenna, yeah.
So for the Omni, for the circular polarized, it's not that important.
Not because we decouple the coax from the antenna. So I could do this with the antenna, and it's fine because my cable is decoupled. I got a network inside that decoupled the cable from the antenna. So it's not important on towards the antenna. Same thing with the backpole. You could do this with the backpole and come out with the cable. That's fine because the backpole decouple the cable from the element.
Okay. You talked about XE antennas before. Are you talking about like the Lumineer XE?
Yeah, Lumineer XE. I designed the Lumineer XE. Yeah.
Because one thing often people say, nah, that's just marketing. It's bullshit. Doesn't work. Blah blah. But I have a Lumineer XE dual antenna with the two heads on top. Is this basically the same principle as the double feed antennas, the stacked linear antennas that have a higher gain?
Yeah, that's the same principle. We stack two elements to double the power. And that power will be doubled as long as the angle is met.
So between the two heads on top, basically the stiff wire in between them has to be absolutely straight. So the alignment has to match. If one is slightly bent, you lose the effect, basically.
Not just that, but if the signal's coming in at an angle to the to antenna, then you get a loss.
Yeah, because the two wave will meet the elements at different time And when they combine,
they cancel out each other.
They cancel out. It's called destructive interference.
Yeah.
So when they are straight and the signal come at a straight angle, it make constructive interference. They stack up on each other to make a bigger wave. So you get more distance at the cost of having less reception at other angle.
Yeah.
So if you start to rotate the elements and change them or their orientation, then you change the timing and you produce destructive interference where you used to produce constructive interference.
Okay. What I did in the past was when I got this antenna, I wanted to test it basically in the field. So I did this exact same flight in the same direction on the same day. I just had a high quality pagoda antenna to compare it to, but I put my VTX on 25 milliwatts. I flew out. I haven't the exact numbers right now up my head, but it was a 40% gain in range before the feed really became unflyable, just with the dual. But of course, the downside is if you use the dual antenna on a craft itself and not on your goggles. I think they are actually supposed to be on the goggles.
Yeah,
in the first
supposed
place.
To be on the ground station. People use them on the goggle if you can keep them steady.
Yeah.
People use them on the plane if you don't bank too much.
Yeah, on the plane, it worked, as I said, really well, like a 40% gain in total range at the same power level. But you really see, even on very high power levels, you are like 10 kilometers out, you have a perfectly clear image if you fly level. But as soon as you bank like just 45 degrees, the signal is gone. Yeah. It's just gone. So you have a very narrow a band of signal where you get still a reception, and you also cannot use it to fly high, so you have to stay low, because if you fly high, the signal will just pass over you. But
there will be an angle between you and the antenna.
And
actually on those antenna, there's two now. There's the one on top and bottom, and there's two other that are at 45 degrees. So if you bank past 45 degrees, you could in theory regain some signal, because there's they call this a side lobe. Each time you stack antenna, you form a pair of side lobe, and you could ride those side lobe at certain angle. They are not really useful. We try to limit the side lobing when we stack antenna. So that's the distance between my two elements. It's calibrated to still have some pretty decent gain and reduce those side lobe, because they are not really useful. So it's somewhat wasted energy.
Is that because you've got the two antennas here and here? When the signal's coming perpendicular to them, obviously the signal reaches at the same time, but as it angles over, one's actually a full wavelength further away.
Yeah. Okay. And the distance between the element will change, the geometry of what you described.
Yeah. It'll change the angle at which you get that one full wavelength away. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
I have one more question on my end. I think we will also go into the medium break soon. You talked about the singularity antennas before, that they have a very narrow, fine-tuned frequency. How does that affect the use of different channels? Like, how much can be the difference between the perfectly tuned center channel of our FPV system and the channel the furthest away?
It won't be enough to make a difference in flight.
Okay.
If you were to able to, like example, use a 5.4 gigahertz, then you may start to feel it. Yeah.
Okay, so with the narrow band, you mean like in a plus minus 300 megahertz range, not like 50 megahertz narrow.
For example, a skew planar wheel. I don't know if people remember it's still in use today. So they got like a 900 megahertz bandwidth, so it's super wide. But as you want to make an antenna smaller, the smaller, then the bandwidth is reduced. So the usable bandwidth of the singularity is I designed it to be just 5.6 to 6 gigahertz. It could be used at 5.4, but that's where you start to be you'll be losing like half power maybe.
Yeah, you won't make range records with that.
No. Yeah. That's why so I made the antenna to be just the channel bandwidth that we use, and so anything extra is just not wasted. So I can make the antenna as small as possible at the cost of having tolerance that are very high. That's why about a bit over a year ago, I switched the construction of the singularity into an LDS, an LDS part. LDS stands for laser design structuring. So basically, it's a plastic, or in my case, a some kind of ceramic hybrid that is etches with a laser, and they plunge it into a soup. It copper attached to those laser etching, and you form a basically PCB in 3 dimensions.
Cool. All right, with that, we're going to take a break right now. If you wouldn't mind hanging around for 3 minutes, Hugo, we're going to be right back, and we're going to continue the conversation. Hang in there. Oh my gosh, during the break, we had some horrible news. Ladies and gentlemen, there was a crime that was committed right in the middle of the show. This is horrible. I'm talking about that. This is a crime against humanity. I'm pissed.
I'm actually pissed. This is I can't believe this. My housemate just came into the house and said my bike wasn't there. I've looked on the Ring doorbell and someone stole my bike half an hour ago while I was on the podcast in the middle of the day. This is going to be terrible, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's the video of them taking my bike.
Find this guy. Find him. I want him in jail tonight.
You can't make this up. That's crazy.
Okay. Hey,
Can't have anything in Portsmouth.
Kind of getting back to I'm sorry about your bike, Luke. I really am. What kind of was it? A nice bike?
No, it was a shitty bike. But
okay.
the whole reason I had it was a shitty bike that I could keep outside and no one would steal, so I could ride to the shops and whatever.
Right. Oh, jeez. You can't have anything nice in
I
Portsmouth.
should go and check my car's still there.
Well, that'd be harder to carry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before on working our way back in this morning before the show, I went out and did some flying at my little local Sunday flying club, and one of the guys we got his radio set up so he can take off his Delta Wing. It was like a fighter jet Delta Wing, and then there's an EDF, and as he's firing up the EDF, his fan broke. So he gets out his timber, and he's taking off, and the plane takes off, and I hear telemetry lost. And all of a sudden, you see the plane just hard-nosed into the ground. And this is at a baseball field, so we had to go around the fence, wait for the fence to be opened up. I'm talking to the guy, and I said, trying to figure out what happened. Why did you lose telemetry? And I asked him, did you take this receiver out of a plane that was crashed? And he goes, yeah. So I walked up and we looked at the plane. This thing was destroyed, right? The fuselage was gone. And I pulled his receiver out. I took a photo of it. He broke the antennas off his receiver, so he soldered them both back on.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And I guess just with one big blob, basically.
Yeah, big blob for each antenna. It was just like, when you break these antennas off and you lose, like, if you lose the pad, throw it away. You can't save it. So, anyways, we're back with Hugo Chamberland, True RC from Canada. So, Mark, you had a question.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat right before we started the break. Is my understanding correct that for circular antennas, the design is the same for receiving and transmitting? And yeah. I already answered that in the chat, but I guess it makes sense to address that in the podcast as well.
Mm-hmm. It's the exact same. It's the there's no difference for the wave to go in or out. The only difference is power handling. So when you transmit, there's a lot more power into the antenna than when you receive. So let's say you were broadcasting at, 10 watts or 100 watts. You need an antenna that is conductive enough not to overheat. That's it. That's the only difference.
So is this what in the past we've from VAS they had a transmit antenna was I think 4 lobes and a receiver it was 5 lobes? Is that because of the power, or it may have been the other way around?
No, it was. I don't know.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Marketing. Maybe.
You may use a receiver antenna to be more directional because the receiver is fixed in space.
And you can control it.
But if you have 2 omni antenna, there's no point to having different that you must add different number of lobes or whatnot into each transmitter or receiver. There's no point. That's the physics is the same if the wave goes in or go out. Example: a battery. The electron actually goes out, the negative terminal and go back into the positive one. But when we design or make an electronic circuit, we make the design such that power goes from the plus to the minus. But in fact, it's the reverse. But the maths are the same. So it's a bit the same way. If wave go out the antenna, it's the exact same math as the waves that go in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's
on the subject of circular polarized. There's actually something Luke and I were discussing earlier. There's a lot of people advising to put right hand and left hand circular polarized on a receiver, and we basically couldn't work out why this would even have any advantage at all. Is there a time where this would work, or is it really just internet rumors?
We try often to I made experiment to test that. So I use left and right antenna on a receiver, especially on the DJI and the multi antenna setup. And the theory or the hypothesis was that when you have direct line of sight, you use right hand to right hand, and then when you are no line of sight, you can catch a reflection with a left hand antenna. So you try.
You share the results. What I said to Darren when he said that was that I didn't think it would help because it would be out of phase with the main signal, so you kind of it wouldn't be able to decipher it. But maybe that's not the case, because maybe like MIMO technology works with 4G. Maybe it can decipher the. Yeah, carry on. I just wanted to share that before.
Yeah, we try with the DJI Vista and the R unit, and the results were, the difference was very thin, very small. So it cannot be concluded that it would be like night and day in the next eye of the day. It wasn't, the difference wasn't there enough to be beyond a small difference in setup and such.
But I wonder, now that you mentioned the reflections again, when we talked about that before, you said the reflections can be, in certain situations, stronger than the actual line of sight signal.
Yeah, when there's no line of sight, for example.
Yeah. So that just come up in my head. When I rebuild my new ground station, my plan is to use the SteadyView X receiver. That's a diversity receiver on my ground station. And the initial idea was to put either one patch antenna plus one omni antenna for close range on my antenna tracker on the ground station, or alternatively using two big patch antennas in a slight angle just to cover a bigger area. But now that you say that, maybe it would make sense, especially if I fly from a hill where the reflections from the ground could be stronger. If I just put two patch antennas on it at exactly parallel, but one left and one right hand polarized, so just to make sure I get the reflections if they are there. Otherwise, I still have the line of sight. So basically the diversity receiver would switch between direct and reflected signals instead.
Yeah, that could work. We use certain setup like this successfully in indoor race. So they had they were making a race inside a museum, all sorts of airplane and stuff. It's tiny whoops race. So lots of multipath, lots of stuff in the way. So they had a setup of what's the name? That's rapid fire receiver. Okay. So they are all diversity, and each of them had a right hand and left hand MXR antenna, both facing opposite way. So MXR is basically an omni without nulls on top, but a big nulls on the bottom. So they use two back to back, right hand and left hand, into a diversity setup, and it was pretty decent.
Not bad. Sounds good. One more question from my side. In the past, I saw different antennas before all this full case PCB style tiny little antennas came up. The classic mushroom antennas, for example, the cloverleaf antennas. I saw some with like bent loops on each side, 3 or 4 lobes. Doesn't really matter, but some are smoothly bent, and I saw the cloverleaf antennas from who's the manufacturer? Can't remember anymore. That are basically square shaped. Yeah, is there
VAS? I think.
VAS. Is there a big difference between these shapes if they are bent or in the cloverleaf shape, or how does that affect the signal behavior?
There's not a big difference, not a night and day difference, but anyway, ideally you want the radiating parts of the antenna to be at the same distance through the arc. So the cloverleaf does this. They have the radiating part of the antenna, the aft that is radiating is forming an arc with a constant radius, a constant distance from the center. And you want to keep that. If you were to bend this arc that in a square shape, then there's a radiating part that is farther away from the center than another one. And this affects the axial ratio of the antenna. It will be less circular in some area and more circular in other. So I think there's no point in getting away from the let's say the most effective shape. Like a water droplet is the most is the shape of least energy, so the most efficient one. So that's a bit of the same principle. You need a shape, okay, that will keep the distance from the center the same through the radiator element, and that is the sphere. So if you follow a sphere, the math is much more simpler. Basically, you could have square shape, and you will need to change the tilt of those as you go through the arc. That would be super complex to compute. That would be possible to do like with a software like I use, but that would be over engineering.
I assume with the cloverleaf antennas, with the normal arc and the radius thing, I assume the radius has to be like a quarter wavelength as well in this case.
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
If you are at a quarter wavelength, then your tilt will be 45 degrees. If you reduce, then you will have to lower your tilt. So let's say an 1/8 of a wavelength, then you will need a tilt of 22 degrees. See?
Okay.
Yeah, Singularity have 16 or 18 degrees, I don't remember, something like that. So it's, since the antenna is super small, the tilt angle is lower.
Does that affect the receiving antenna? Say that you have a 16-degree tilt on the transmit antenna. Does the receive antenna ideally need to match that tilt, or doesn't it matter?
No,
it's just spinning.
No, the produced wave, the waves that are produced are still spread into two axes, 90 degrees from each other. And one thing I wanted to say on this podcast that circular polarized wave kind of don't exist. Okay, it's an emergent properties of two linear wave. So you have you basically a CP antenna doesn't produce CP wave. There's not wave that are like corkscrew shaped like spatial wave. No, they exist only in the map, in the observation. So it's an emergent properties. The CP antenna produce two linear waves that are 90 degrees from each other, with a timing between them that is 90 degrees too. So if vertical is 90 degree in advance than the horizontal, then you get right hand wave and vice versa. But there's no special circular wave. It's just a CP antenna spread power equally onto 2 axes. So when people say, "Oh, a linear antenna is good for long range, it's better than CP for long range," but a CP is a linear antenna.
Yeah, I think
all CP antenna are linear antenna, but all linear antenna aren't CP antenna, because linear antenna spread their power onto a single axis, while CP spread into 2 axes.
I think you just disrupted the words of many people.
I'm not saying anything because I just don't know what to say.
Yeah, and the reason why a left-hand antenna doesn't receive a right-hand wave is simply as it received the first, let's say, vertical wave, then a destructive interference happened with the horizontal one. So you don't see any power from the left-hand antenna.
Is it kind of the phase is 90 degrees in front rather than behind?
Yes, exactly.
See.
So the left hand produce destructive interference from the right hand pair of linear wave.
And how would that affect like a linear receive antenna?
The linear antenna will receive one of the 2 waves, so you get half the power. You get 3 dB loss. That's where the 3 dB loss between CP and linear comes from, because linear will only catch one of the 2 waves that come out of a CP antenna.
And I have heard something from people saying like 6 to 9 dB loss, but when it's just 3 dB, it's
3. You get a CP antenna is 2 linear antenna.
So could you have a vertical and a horizontal linear antenna in a network and then pick them both up, or would that just be a circular polarized antenna?
That would be if you take 2 dipole, place them 90 degrees from each other, and feed them with a network, and you place them at certain distance apart, like half a wave, for example, or quarter wave, and then you will produce a circular polarized beam. There's many, you can make your own. Let's say you take 4 biquad antenna, okay, and you place 2 horizontal and 2 vertical, and you feed them with a spatial network that will phase them. You will produce a circular polarized antenna out of your 4 linear biquad. You could do it with 2 Yagi that you cross and feed through a network, and you could flip that network to change from right hand to left hand if you like.
Wow.
This is just an awesome chat.
Yeah, see, this is why I said we need Hugo on.
I'm thinking the whole time, when will we start to switch to some INAV topics? But right now, more and more stuff comes up here.
No INAV.
It's a bit like it's an emergent properties, like temperature. Temperature that don't exist at micro level. You can't measure the temperature of an atom. An atom have no temperature. It have a kinetic energy. It moves. And at the macro level, at our level, that movement, we detect it as heat. But in reality, heat is just the combined movement energy of all those particles. So heat don't exist. In the same way, circular polarized wave don't exist. We perceive circular polarized waves, but they are just 2 linear polarized waves, 90 degrees from each other, with a timing difference that is either right hand, because one is advanced on the other, or left hand, because one is late on the other.
I have another question in the chat. It's actually interesting, because I think the answer to that should be clear. Hugo, what's your opinion on the downsizing of antennas to only half wavelength or even 1/4 wavelength for drones?
It depends on the type of antenna and what you are downsizing. Let's say you have a dipole. A dipole is 2 quarter wave element forming a half wave dipole. And if you were to cut those elements, you will reduce the antenna efficiency. It's you can go around this. You could try to meander the element, make zigzag, to keep the same length of copper into a smaller size. That work, but you reduce the antenna aperture, so you reduce the efficiency. When I designed the singularity, the actual element, the length of the copper, is still half a wavelength. It's just winded up. And I designed it such that at this size, it is the size that I start to affect efficiency through the aperture size. And I could do smaller than this, but the antenna will be less efficient. I don't want the antenna to be less efficient than a bigger one, so I made it this size, which is the scientifically smallest size possible before there start to be percentage loss of efficiency.
So is a singularity, does it have the same RF aperture as a dipole then?
Yeah.
I see. Because it, as far as I'm aware, the singularity is the smallest circularly polarized antenna.
It's just the smallest circular polarized antenna you can get. Yeah.
I see. And it has, at least theoretically, exactly the same range as a bigger antenna.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that certainly I use a singularity on my goggles as a receiver antenna. And it's always seemed to work just as well, but it's,
Yeah, I could go smaller, like I said, but then I would make compromise. And that's where I stop. So it's kind of the limit. So I called it the singularity, because you can theoretically I cannot go smaller, so I call this way.
You cannot go smaller without breaking physics, basically.
Without breaking efficiency. Breaking physics. You cannot go smaller and stay same efficient, otherwise it would break physics. Yeah.
So what is the compromise with the singularity antenna? Are there no compromises?
Bandwidth. It's bandwidth.
It is bandwidth, okay, but that's also an advantage in some ways because it means you have less noise coming in. Or
so if you would go smaller, you would have to reduce the frequency range tighter. So you would basically need to make like multiple antennas for different channels. Then at the end, if you would go smaller. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I will need. If I go slightly smaller, I will need two. Singularity, a high and low, for example. And if I go for more smaller still, I will need like 3 or more. But I won't, they are small enough, I think.
Yeah. I also think that. I also have another question. It's more back to RC controlling antennas for Crossfire and R9 in the 900 megahertz band, or also in the 400, I think. There are these classic whip antennas, the loose cable antennas, and there are so many discussions in the groups how they actually work, because you have that one wire that goes in, of course, that's the coax wire, and then you have this small part of shrink tube, and from that shrink tube you have on the R9 antennas, as an example, the black wire coming out at the tip, and then you have a transparent wire going out at the bottom. So basically it splits in two halves. What's the purpose of these two halves, and how's the recommended way of mounting them? Just as an example, I always thought, okay, the upper part that goes straight out is basically the active part, but I never knew what the difference then is. And on some of my, especially the very small planes, I usually stick the longer part with a little bit of shrink tube out the fuselage on the top, and the second part that goes downwards, it's just laying inside the fuselage.
Okay.
What's the proper way to use these, and how do they work?
Well, it is a form of dipole antenna. A dipole antenna, you have the active, people call this, and the ground side, but it's just a active element and a counterpoise. Okay, so you want one element that catch the top of the wave, and the other catch the bottom of the wave, so they contribute contribute each to put energy, one that energy in a direction, and the other is put energy in the other direction. So it's an alternating current. There's no positive or negative. There's just two active wire, one that pushes while the other pull, and vice versa. Okay. And you want to feed this into a coaxial cable. So ideally, the two wire are equally as important. So you ideally will have a T shape to keep the feed to interact, but you on most small range receiver like 2.4 receiver, they just use an active element and a counterpoise that is hanging, so to speak. But what that does is, like, what happened with your plane is the grounded element is coupling with the feed line, and the feed line becomes a counterpoise.
So what we had before, when they run in parallel, you disrupt the signal.
Yeah. The best case you could do is have the active in line with the coax, and the counterpoise escape at a 30-degree angle. Okay.
Oh, that's what I've seen on these 1.3 gigahertz long-range antennas, where basically they are in that angular shape that you put on top of your wing or fuselage or whatever.
So this way, the cable become partly counterpoise, and the wire is also counterpoise, and they don't decouple with each other, but they don't produce too much destructive interference. Okay, they produce less. So it's a compromise.
Okay, so basically, if I want to use these antennas, because for example they just came with my receiver, ideally I would either straighten them up with a straw or so to have a rigid vertical single antenna with the basically building my own T-style antenna, or alternatively just get them as an angle. And if we have like small planes, let's take for example the Drift or the Dart 250G, where drag matters a lot, or where we land on the antenna constantly because the wings are so low to the ground when we land, we can leave them dangle around, but of course we won't get top-notch range then.
Yeah. You can also, people have talked, and I've fly an Immortal L. I don't know if you've seen that. It's you basically have your coax, okay, and the ground leg is the coax is straight with the active element, but the ground leg is 90 degree. That work. Yeah, that work. It's not too bad.
Okay,
sometimes for mounting, for an airplane long range, I won't do this. But for a quad, it's a good compromise to do this.
But it doesn't actually give you, like people. I think what people were saying at the time was, now you get the two polarizations, but that doesn't actually happen.
No, it does. Yeah,
it does.
It does. Yeah, you will. Okay. The antenna will have some, let's say it's vertical, but you will gain some horizontal polarization.
Okay.
Out of this.
So yeah. in theory, then, when you you have that L shape, for a diversity receiver with two antennas, you get perfect reception if you fly level, and you have perfect reception when you are flying in a 90-degree bank. And if you use these antennas and put them in a L, you lose maybe 3 dB or so in total. On the receiving side, but you have it constantly, no matter what orientation you have.
Yeah.
So then,
because a dipole antenna like this has one active element and two ground, because the cable is always there.
Yeah.
Forming a counterpoise. Let's say you have a monopole antenna. Those just a coax, and there's a small whip that goes out. These are still somewhat dipole because the antenna wants to have a counterpoise. If there's no counterpoise soldered to it, that would be the cable and your receiver and whatever is attached to it. So those antennae are random, they produce random result because the counterpoise is often randomly placed, attached to random things.
Yeah, so I think that would be a good opportunity if we have a diversity receiver and two of these L-shaped antennas. We can basically cover all three axes of a fixed ring and can fly aerobatics even at a decent range still without ever losing signal because of bad antenna orientation. Because you always have then one element in a good angle to the actual radio.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's very interesting.
It's a bit like, do you know a turnstile antenna?
Yeah.
A turnstile it's two dipoles that are connected to a same coax. One that is too small and one that is too long. So the too small one will be roughly 100 ohm because it's too small, but mostly capacitive. And the too long one will be 100 ohm again, but mostly inductive. And you wire them together, the induction cancel out the capacitance, and you get a 50 ohm load. So the antenna will work from a power point of view, and you will have two polarization. That would be a dual polarized. It will be circular polarized from one side, right end, and left end from the other. But it will work as a multipolarized antenna.
Okay. There's a question from INAV FPV in the chat. Mark, can you ask Hugo what if any considerations or if there are any considerations when designing an antenna for 5.8 gigahertz analog versus digital, if there are differences in the antenna design?
No, because this is the same wave. It's the modulation that changed, but the antenna doesn't know this. It's the same. Yeah, sometimes they market antenna as HD antenna or digital. It's mostly marketing. It's just they use an RPSMA, so it fits the digital goggle also or whatnot.
Yeah, because I think most of the digital systems, I'm not sure about HD0, but at least Voxnay and DJI, they have RPSMA connectors on their goggles, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And the SMA and RPSMA doesn't really make a difference?
No, it's the same. It's just the same thing, but they reverse the female and male part into the mating.
Joshua Bardwell had an interesting video about that topic, if RPSMA or SMA is better. And he actually said he prefers RPSMA. And the reason is the whole side, basically the female side of the connector, over time, if you often screw it on and off, gets worn out, and the hole in the center gets a little bit bigger. You get less strong contact, and that's why he prefers RPSMA, because then you have the pin side on the goggles, because you cannot quickly replace the SMA connector on the goggles. It will just stay the pin, and if the antenna is worn out, you just get a new antenna and put it on. So he prefers RPSMA actually.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a valid point. Yeah, because the hole in the SMA will, worn or be deformed if you cross thread the antenna. You can, damage that little female pin easily, more easily than the male pin.
You could sometimes even have different tolerances on the antenna protection side. Maybe one antenna comes with an SMA that has a slightly bigger pin, maybe 1 or 200th of a millimeter, and widen the hole on the female side, and then you use another antenna with a smaller pin, and suddenly it has no good contact anymore.
Yeah, but from someone who connect thousands and thousands of, we test every antenna, and I put an adapter on the RF meter to test each one of them. The male pin does work. Does get worn.
Okay.
Yeah. I have an RPSMA adapter on the meter, and after 500, 1,000, it starts to be worn. I can actually measure the diameter of the pin with a caliper and see the difference.
And do you find it wears significantly slower than the slot, or is it?
Yeah, it wears slower. It does, yeah. Our PSMAs, they last longer. So that's why I say that Joshua is right.
Yeah. I think sometimes it also might depend on the type of antenna mount. If you have, like, just take as an example here the Foxeer Lollipop, where you turn the whole SMA and the whole antenna to screw it on, you have a constant spinning friction of the pin that goes into the hole. While on other antennas, with a loose SMA nut on the top, you just put it in, so it just screws down and goes straight in without spinning. I think that might also make a difference.
Well, I don't know about the Foxeer stubby, but our stubby are free floating inside. That means you can turn inside. So as you turn, it's just like you turn the SMA nut, and the antenna inside may or may not turn.
Not sure if you can hear that. They are also loose inside.
Yeah, they are free floating because it is glued to the SMA barrel.
So that explains why my Lumiere actually made a noise when I shook it. Yeah.
They are actually not spinning. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so one thing less to worry about.
But while on the subject of SMA, it's worth pointing out that TrueRC have different SMA connectors to everyone else. They've got these really nice knurled SMA connectors that you can just hand screw on so easy.
Oh, nice.
I bought some of your SMA connectors just to solder to, coax and use for other, antennas I've made myself and that kind of thing, because they're so much better than any other SMA connectors you can buy.
Thank you. Yeah, we first designed those SMA. It was for the stubby antenna, because we wanted the stubby to be the most durable as possible. And sometimes what happened is when the stubby got a hit on the top, it pushes the SMA inside and crushes the antenna. So gluing, a smooth hexagonal SMA inside a plastic case was a challenge. So I started to design a new SMA that would have a rougher finish, and the knurling, that's how you say that, knurling was a good choice. And when I received the first prototype, that's really nice. I want all my antenna to have this. So there, I switch all antennas to the knurl finish, which is it's pretty nice, I think.
There's another question from /7FPV in the chat. Are angled adapters, for example 90-degree on the Goggle or VAX, really a problem for signal strength, or is it just theoretically a problem and not measurable in our case? So basically we are back at the SMA adapter stuff, but what about the right-angled one? Does that change anything in the signal?
Yeah, right-angle adapter can be more lossy than straight one. But again, it is not relevant to a significant range loss.
Okay, because that's a good question. Because I remember that I have seen videos and not experimented it myself yet, but for data cables on PC, for example, like USB cable, if you really squish them and make a kink into them without even breaking, it can reduce the bandwidth or cause connection losses at high data transfer rates.
The effect there is not the 90-degree bend. Yeah, it is in some way, but the high-speed cable of data cable start to have an impedance because the data rate is so high that it's almost radio wave. So those cable, the spacing of the conductor inside and the shield is all, there's math involved to try to reduce the inductance of the cable. So everything, the twisting of the individual conductor and the space between them and everything is, calculated. And when you crush it, you mess with this with this, and the cable will start to have a low SWR. say high SWR. Sorry, you will have a reflection at the cable, because those data rate are so high that you are close to radio wave at that speed. So.
Yeah, so if you have like, I mean, it basically constantly switches on, off, or between low and high voltage to transmit the ones and zeros. And if you have a cable, it acts like a capacitor, basically smoothing out that curve. So you have no hard cut to a 1 and hard cut to a 0, but instead it goes like a curve to 1, and then it goes to like a curve to 0. And if you squeeze it and you change the inductance of the cable, these smooth curves get longer, and then maybe just start to get waves instead of big jumps, so the receiver cannot distinguish between 0 and 1 anymore and gets errors.
Exactly. That the time between the switch from 0 to 1 and vice versa will get longer because you smoothing out those square wave.
A question I had for you, I know you mentioned Luminaire a while back, so is that, I know you're in Canada. Is Luminaire one of the products that you actually license?
Mm-hmm.
So Get FPV, Luminaire, that is essentially your product line, or it's not made by you, but it's licensed by you?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, without putting, one of your vendors in peril, but is there the quality difference? If you get a true RC, would I be better off to buy a true RC antenna from you as opposed to getting a Luminaire? Is there a difference, or are they roughly equivalent?
They are roughly equivalent. For example, many I provide parts that I test and make quality control of them to Luminaire, and they do assembly, and I do some quality control for them. Especially, example, there's a new product that then the first batch I will test and such. So I am confident they are equivalent. For myself, for example, I don't make an equivalent to the Axi2 antenna. It's a specific model to them.
Okay.
Which is it is like a big singularity. So it is a singularity with a wider bandwidth. So it's a great antenna, and I don't make that model here.
Okay. There's another question from INAV FPV for Hugo. Why haven't I seen anyone, including TrueRC, release any? Okay, why did TrueRC not release any helical antennas yet? Only ORT and VAS seem to make them, unless I make one myself.
Well, I don't. It's a personal choice. I could have maybe, but I rather do an array of XR antenna than making an helical antenna. Helical antenna are a traveling wave antenna, and it's like stacking multiple antenna one after the other, like a Yagi antenna. You got multiple elements that are stacked. So a helical antenna is a bit of the same. They are very long, so not super practical for goggle use. That's mainly why we don't make them. In fact, we designed the XR and their variation in the beginning to not have the length associated with a helical antenna. But from we could make, but yeah.
Yeah, from what I understood in the past, there's also one big issue. I'm not sure if that also adapts to antenna arrays, but for helical antennas, for each additional winding you add, you basically reduce the cone in the same way as an array antenna would reduce the cone for the gain, but the gain you achieve additionally for each round gets smaller and smaller and smaller every time. So at the end, the higher the gain is, the less efficient gets the antenna, and at some point you just reduce the receiving area more and more and more without any additional signal gain.
Exactly. You could not do like a 100 turn helical. That would pass 16, 18 turn. There's no gain to have past that. Maybe if one would change the pitch of the turn as you go, then maybe you could go further. Okay, like you see on those Yagi antenna, they have different spacing as you move along, then different length of element as you move along to try to keep the traveling wave. Maybe you could. And each time you add more element, you add more side lobe, wasting power into side lobe that are not really useful because they are too small to be used, and they create nulls in between them. So I rather have a single element antenna that is 9, 10 dB than having a stack of 5 or 4 or 5 turn to achieve the same gain and have nulls and side lobing. For example, our X-ray antenna is an array, but have a single lobe with very minimal side lobing. It's act as a single antenna.
And I guess like a 10 dB patch antenna or 10 dB array area antenna also has a higher beam width, basically a higher usable beam width than a 10 dB helical antenna.
Yes, because you don't have side lobing. Yeah, so you try to, let's say, have the maximum gain out of a single element. So because each time you stack, you add ugliness, you add side lobing and nose on the side, and you waste a bit of energy there. It is radiated, but in not very useful way.
Interesting stuff for sure. Okay, I think we should maybe still do our little announcement that was planned before we just drop it in the group with no comment. So yeah, when I'm already talking, just a quick announcement over a change on the group. As many of you already might know, we have a member map in the Fixed Wing group. That's basically just a linked Google map with icons we add by hand. Yeah, for every single member that goes into the group and says he wants to be on the map, we have to add them by hand. It's hardly usable, it's slow, and especially if people leave the group or move around, the markers are actually dead. So what we actually did, or what Darren did in this case, over the last few days, we will have a new member map on our website where you can set your location yourself. So you can set a point where you live, just the rough city, don't need to be your exact address, of course, it shouldn't be. And then add your interests. What are your flying types? What are your social media links? I think we have even a small info field where you can write text.
Yeah. So there's the flying styles, social media. So we got Discord, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And then there's just a text box where you can write whatever within reason, whatever you would like. Keep it family friendly.
Yeah, of course. And the big change in this case is also that if you make an entry on that map with your email address, you have to confirm the entry with your email address. It has a timeout of 12 months. So if you, after about a year, you get an email as a reminder to refresh your marker. If you don't do that, it just gets deleted. So if you want to be, if you don't want to change it, or if you don't want to update or don't want to be on the map anymore after a year, it gets automatically deleted to keep it clean and always up to date. Darren, anything you want to add as well?
Yeah, I mean, when you get the reminder, if you did want to make changes, basically the form you fill in to do the initial registration on the map, it's basically the same form with all your information already filled in. So if you wanted to change anything, it's an opportunity at that point to do it. If not, ideally as little as possible, but there is on the contact page an option to make an update to the map. So if you email us with your email address, we could make an update, but the whole point of this was really to have it self-maintaining, so it's a bit easier for us as well. The other thing is the old markers from the old map won't be copied across. It would need to be done manually, and there's just way too many of them. So it is a fresh start, but like we said earlier, a lot of those markers could be not needed or not for people in the group anymore. So yeah, it's a bit of a fresh start, but it's I think that's the best way forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know you guys have been talking about it for the last few weeks. What happened?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the link is actually on the website. So if you go to INAV Fixed Wing Group, go to Member Resources. There's a link there for the map. But we'll put something in the group and on Discord as well.
Yeah, I was trying to do it by hand for a number of years, and at first it was pretty easy to manage because we're only getting like about 10 people a week getting added on. But then it got really busy, and and then people do move and people do change interest, and some people want to be on the map, some people don't want to be on the map. This is all up to you now, and plus you can say what you want to. And it's the one thing I will say though is that it's really kind of nice when you're in an area and you can find other people who have similar interests. And I have met up with a number of people being here in Southern California who also fly INAV, and it's just great. This is a great way to network with people. So guys, thank you for taking care of that. But yeah, I was not able to keep up with the map anymore over the last 10 months. I've been traveling a lot, so thank you for doing this, because I would like to see the map continue, but to put it in by hand was just virtually impossible anymore.
Yeah, this definitely will make life a lot easier, I think, for everybody. No more questions on entry forms. Just if you want to be on it, we'll maybe put a reminder up that the map exists every so often. But yeah, just use it as you like.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Well, do we have any more questions for our guests today?
Oh, we got one more thing we should really talk about, and that is next Saturday, INAV 6.1 will be out.
Next Saturday?
Yes, next Saturday.
Okay, Whoa. Good to know.
Yeah, it's only a small update, mostly bug fixes, but there are a couple of new features in it, which has given it the reason why it's gone to 6.1. If you're running DJI O3, the HD mode will be supported, and if you're a FreeSky person, there will be an option for FBus. So they're the new features. Everything else is really bug fixes and just tidying up, and that includes the issue that people with H743s are having, which was caused by a change in the compiler settings, but that's fixed. But yeah, that will be out next Saturday, so I'm sure Pavel will have something about that.
What he had? How did he have something to say about FBus being added?
Yeah, that was the first thing he had out about FBus.
Video about it.
He had a rant that went on for about 4 minutes, I believe. Yeah, over the last week here. So that was interesting to hear.
Remember, Steve, that his rant about all the receiver to flight controller protocols was the same type of rant that I had with the different C-Link protocols? Something you can inform your management about, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially, there's the one thing I'll say is that when you've been around for 10, 11 years, it's like one change every couple of years adds up to 5 changes. So that did. And then the other thing is that I think that this FBus is something that's going to stick around long term. So I know it started off as Smart Port, then it was F-Port 2.0, and now it's FBus. And then his whole complaint was that it was just a speed difference. It was just the baud rate change, and it was between F port 2.0 and FBus. But it's a lot more complex than that. It has to do with how things connect to each other inside of it's the ability to get telemetry back from the devices like GPS and servos back into the receiver, which go back into the radio. So that's what that's all about. But this FBus, it's really important that I'm glad to see INAV was the first one to pick up on it. We still need help getting a Lua together for something like a WAPU Lua.
Yeah, don't look at me. I don't know Lua at all.
Does somebody like a nice side project? Talk to me.
Yeah, I think that's a topic for a different show at this point. Hugo, any other thing you might want to tell us? Something in the pipeline maybe coming?
INAV 7 in October, November. Oh, sorry, was that for Hugo?
But a lot of people ask for O3 antenna, and we are working on it. So I will tell a message. We are working on O3 antenna, 2 or 3 different type, and that I don't know when. If you ask me when, I could say 2 weeks. I could say, but it won't be 2 weeks. But we will definitely have. And I also invite people to every now and then go into our blog at 2RC. There's always plenty of reading and good information to have about antenna and sometimes other subject. But I invite people to read it.
Sounds great.
Each time, I have sometimes several emails about the same question. Then I start to make a blog post about it to else.
Sounds good. Will that be basically a dual band antenna for 2.4 and 5.8?
Yes. I will have a dual band antenna, because otherwise you can use 2 single 5.8 antenna if you like. 2.4 is only for radio control on the O3.
Yeah.
So if you don't use the DJI remote control, then the 2.4 band isn't used.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you, Hugo. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today. This has been really a wonderful show. I mean, we really learned a lot about this. There's when you help correct Mark Hoffman, you've done something big. It's just,
thank you, Steve.
He sees the errors. I've known Mark for years now, and when you see, I can sit here and watch the wheels turning in his head, and it's like, yeah, this is it. My gosh, this. What did I think of that? That makes perfect sense. So yeah,
I think we have to make multiple clips of this talk, and then we can use it as cannon fodder or as ammunition if another antenna discussion starts somewhere in the group.
Yeah, be sure to give links. This was like a TED Talk today, practically. So fantastic, great having you on. I guess that's it. So everybody, thank you for joining us for Wing Talk, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.